welcome to GryphonArt. This week, with Easter looming ever nearer, I thought that I'd just show you how to make a little Easter box, and in this case this one's just filled with mini chocolate eggs. So we're going to start with a piece of standard A5 cardstock in landscape mode. We're scoring at this stage on the wrong side of the card, and we're following the score lines for the standard A5 milk carton template. So we're scoring at 2, 4, 6 and 8 inches. Then we're going to turn that anti-clockwise so that we can score 3/8 of an inch for the top of our box, 1 7/8 of an inch, and then at 4 5/8 of an inch for our baseline. We then just turn that back to landscape mode again, so clockwise round, and we're scoring at 1 inch and at 5 inches, just down to that first 3/8 of an inch score line. At this point I no longer need my Martha Stewart scoring board because I prefer to do these last score lines with my self-heal mat. So I'm now scoring on the right side of my card. I've flipped that over and I'm going to score in odd panels. So do one, miss one, do one. So just those diagonal lines for the sides of our box. It's just in the top section of that panel. Now, I am whizzing through this for the sake of those who are familiar with the A5 milk carton. If you haven't made an A5 milk carton before, you may be better off looking at the original A5 milk carton tutorial, which covers an awful lot more detail for you. Right, so I'm now ready to fold and crease all of those score lines. And I am lining up my fold lines with my score lines rather than using the edges of the box, or the edges of the card rather, which may not be square. So it's just something to bear in mind. Right, so I've just got these little additional ones to do for the sides of the closing section of my box. Always a little bit more awkward. And now I can cut away this little excess piece of card in the corner that we don't need, and cut from into the base for my flaps. So this is the bottom of my box. So that now mirrors the template, which is incidentally downloadable from my website at gryphonart.co.uk, and I will put a link to that and any other information in the description part for this tutorial. Now the next thing that I need to do whilst the box is still in this flat phase is to create the holes, these Easter egg shaped holes that form the windows in this box. Now I am going to be using a memory box die cutter for those windows, And I am going to show you the approach that I take with that, because it might help you to ensure that your windows are lining up fairly evenly. So I am going to need to set up my Big Shot die cutting machine. So I'll get that sorted, and at that point I'll come back to you. Now this little die cutter is a framelit style die cutter, and in fact, in case you're interested, it is the Memory Box Filagree egg, and it's style number 98306. So that's going to require that I use the whole of my Sizzix platform along with my 2 cutting plates. So in order to help me with that positioning, I've taken a scrap piece of card and I've cut it down to equal the size of one of the panels that forms the side of my box. So that's 2 inches by 2 3/4 inches. I've then taken my die cutter and positioned it centrally within that scrap piece of card in such a way that I want it to appear on the side of my box, and then passed it through the machine in order to ascertain where that hole is going to be located. So I've now effectively got a guide that's going to take a lot of the guesswork out of positioning my die cutter on all of these panels. So if I show you one panel, I won't show you them all because, you know, there's no need, but I'll use that one panel. I can then position that die cutter, and if you sort of push it about, you know whether it's moving at all and it's within the boundary of that hole. Once I've got that, you could use some tape at this point to hold it in place, but I generally find if I just carefully slide my other plate over the top, I can pass that through my machine. And I often just pass it back again as a double measure. So if I now just remove that template, I've got a nice little egg shape there as well. You can see how that's positioned, and as long as I'm always lining up in the same way, so from the base, which is where I was lining it up, rather than turning the card the other way, because you might find it's positioned slightly differently, you should get a fairly consistent set of windows. Now I'm going to go and do that now, finish off those other 3 panels, and I'll come back to you at that point. So that's all my windows now cut and nice and evenly spaced. So my next job is going to be covering those windows up on the inside of my box with some cellophane. So I've cut a piece of cellophane. I hope you're going to be able to see that all right, actually. But the cellophane is the height of the side of my box panel. So it's 2 3/4 inches high, and it's almost the whole length of the circumference of my box. Now I've said almost because although the whole circumference of my assembled box is going to be close to 8 inches, this cellophane is actually probably 7.5 inches long. Now the reason for that is that I don't really want it to appear at the edge of this box where this flap needs to be joined, because cellophane is not the best thing when it comes to sticking down. So I don't want it to appear, I don't wish for it to interfere with the adhesion at that point. So I cut it slightly short so that it's clear of that end of the box. Now, having mentioned adhesion, I have tried sticking this cellophane with PVA glue, with double-sided tape, and with Yoo-hoo, which are the 3 forms of adhesion that I tend to have in my stock. And I my view of that experiment is that PVA doesn't really stick to the cellophane very well. And there are benefits with both the Yoo-hoo and the double-sided tape. So I'm going to use both, and I'm going to show you, how that combination works. So because I like the way that the double-sided tape works, I'm just going to put some around, quite close to the edge of the box without fussing too much, just on the 4 sides. And that way I know that that cellophane is going to be held in place at the points where it might get pushed in, when the box is picked up and handled. So just at those points there. So that's the first set of double-sided tape. I'm then going to extend some down these central joins as well. And I'll do that to all of these fold lines. And leave these 2 end ones clear. So I'm going to repeat that for the rest of these and finish off, and then I'll come back to you at that point rather than waste your time. So I know that looks a little bit of a muddle. It's now all finished, and I just want to reiterate what you're aiming for to help you. You want to make sure that your cellophane attaches to all the corners of your box. So there's those 3 lines there that you need to cope with. The next point is that you want it to adhere to the edges of your egg shape window as much as possible. So that's the only other thing you need to concern yourself with. I haven't put additional double-sided tape here, for example, and that's because if my cellophane extends beyond this piece of double-sided tape, I can trim it back if that's going to bother me. But if I put double-sided tape here and my cellophane was short, then that would just mean I'd have stickiness inside my box, and that's not really something that I would want. Now, this is a matter of choice, but the only other thing left for me is these corners here. I do really want to try and make sure that the cellophane is quite tight to the edges of this shape, and because of that I'm also going to put on some Yoo-hoo glue to help with that and to overcome that problem. You could go ahead and use multiple layers of the double-sided tape, and that would probably work, but it would take a bit of time, and so I've decided to stick with the Yoo-hoo. So that's basically, I hope you can see, I've basically put some into the areas where the double-sided tape isn't reaching. So for the sake of time, I'm going to do the rest off camera. I'll remove all the backing from my double-sided tape, and at that point I'll come back to you because we'll be ready to put the cellophane in place. Right, so now that's all the Yoo-hoo in place as well. So I'm just going to start by making sure that the end of my cellophane is on the end of that double-sided tape. And I want it to be positioned fairly straight, actually, just to provide. And just work it backwards so it covers all of those. There's a slight kink in that end bit actually, so I'll raise that a bit whilst it's still. Just make sure that goes back down. Okay, and then you can use the bone folder just to make sure that's got a good adhesion. You could do these windows individually if you wanted. I just find the cellophane quite fiddly, so I like to do it as one complete thing. So we've now got our little windows all in place. Now the other thing that we really want to do before assembly is to just put these little die cut eggs in place, because it's an awful lot easier to do that before the box is assembled. Now I did create these 4 little egg cut out shapes when I cut out the windows for my box, and I could use those if I wanted to go with the same colour. I've decided though that I'd rather have a contrast in this instance, so I'm going to use some die cuts, a set of die cuts that I created earlier. Now interestingly enough, in this particular instance the PVA adheres very well, and it's certainly suitable for that job, I've found. And you can obviously choose whichever glue you feel works better for you, but I'm happy with what the PVA achieves in this particular instance, so I'm going to use that because I'm going to find it a lot more easy than trying to use Yoo-Hoo, which is the only other alternative glue that I have available. So as usual, I'm just going to demonstrate one of these for you, and then I'll do the rest off camera to save time. So it does actually help to have a bottle of glue actually that's got a fine point at the end, so it's got a bit more precision than something bigger. And I normally just have these little bottles. You can get fine point glue bottles off eBay for small amounts of money, and I just then decant into them, so I can then target specific areas for applying my glue. It's less easy to see actually on this white, but you can generally see where you've got glue because it's a bit shiny. And I'm not worried at this point about having too much excess, but I am avoiding the area where I'm holding for the time being, because it can very soon stick to your fingers, and with something this fine you can end up tearing the card. So I'm going to leave that section where I'm currently holding the little die cut until just before I'm ready to stick it in place. So I'm just gently dabbing away at that and removing any real excess glue so that that's not going to smear all over my cellophane. It does stick everywhere. There we go. So that looks about right to me. So as I said, now I'm going to very quickly put a little bit of glue on that area that was missed before, and then I'm ready to place it. So I'm just going to start with the tip and just make sure that these seem to be fairly straight, and once you're happy, it's fairly easy. You can then just dab it in place. Now I actually don't dab away at that too much because I want there to be quite a bit of Yoo-Hoo behind the shape in order to hold it, not Yoo-Hoo, PVA glue behind the shape in order to hold it in place. As long as I know that it's sitting on that cellophane, I'll just leave that to dry off. So I'm going to go ahead and put all the rest of these shapes in place, and once that's sorted, then I can come back to you. So that's now all our window embellishments finished with, which means that we can now assemble our box. With that in mind, I have already applied double-sided tape to the long side flap where we'll be joining it at the sides, and also on the opposite base flap. I've then turned my box over and applied double-sided tape to the remaining 3 flaps on the inside of my box. Now, if this doesn't make much sense to you, I have covered this in a lot more detail in my original A5 milk carton tutorial. As I said, there is going to be a link to that in the description area for this video, and if you're new to milk cartons, you may feel that it's beneficial to have a look at that tutorial. So getting back to this box, I do like to do a dry run first, so just make sure that all my fold lines are lining up and I haven't somehow made them out of square. So once I'm happy with that, I can remove the backing tape from my double-sided tape, and in this instance I've noticed that the tape is actually going over the edge of that box, which would mean that there would be stickiness inside my box. So I'm just going to start out by folding that back on itself. Now, if you're using another form of adhesion, you may not have this trouble, so you know that's absolutely fine. So that's sorted. I know that's not going over the edge anymore, so I just position, and I'm concerning myself just with this main body of the box as usual, lining that up, lining my score lines up. And once they're in place, this end flap just tends to fall naturally into position. So then I can apply some pressure, and that's the side of my box sorted. Now for the base of my box, I know that the way I work, the sides tend to go down first. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove the double-sided tape from the back here. Square the box up and apply some pressure inside, just so that I know that those are sticking down all right. Now, the last flap to go down for me tends to be the front flap, so I normally check to see where this join is, and I know that's my back flap. So that goes down next, squaring that up. And it's a matter of opinion, really, so, you know, you can put them down in whatever order you like. And so that's the base done, and then just going to, oops, very noisy, sorry about that. Just apply some pressure inside the box at this stage to make sure that you've got a good adhesion for your base. So we can now have a look at our top, and you'll probably find, because of the fold lines you put in earlier, that this falls into place fairly well. I just try and make sure that these ends are nice and square before really reinforcing those folds into place. So in this particular instance, I'm going to be using a reusable band style closure, and I'll attach a ribbon to that once I've fitted it. So this just goes on and on the box, on and off the box, or even quite easily and quickly. So I find that quite a useful closure for this size box, and that's what we're going to do now. So for that, I've just taken a strip of card that I know exceeds 6 inches in length, because it will be trimmed back, and I've decided to go with 3/8 of an inch on this measurement here, which ties up with that first score line. Now, the main reason for that is because I'm using a 6mm wide ribbon, and I want there to be enough space for that ribbon to stick to. If I was using narrower ribbon, you can see there's a little bit of space either side. If I was using 3mm ribbon, I could probably go for a narrower strip, but that's the reason I've chosen 3/8 of an inch in this case. So I normally work with the front of my box in front of me for some reason. That's just what I'm comfortable with. So I start by placing that strip on the box so that the end of it, you can't see it quite so well, isn't quite at the end, at the edge of that box there. I think you can see that. Then once that's there, I just fold the card strip around the end of the box like a hairpin. You've probably seen me do this several times before if you've been watching my videos. And then round again so that the back actually has 2 layers of card. At that point you can see, particularly in this instance, because it's come off the edge of a piece of A4, I've got quite a bit of excess. So I'm just going to trim that back, slightly back again from the edge of my card. And that's going to form the basis of my closure. Now I'm going to be using an overlapping technique for sticking this, so I'm just going to put some double-sided tape on here so that I can get it right to the end of the strip of card, and I'll just cut it back. Actually, move that out of the way and I can show you how this works. So I'm only going down about 2/3 of the way, and that's going to overlap onto there and needs to stick. So I'm also going to do a similar thing on this side of the card that's going to come in contact. Ooh, that's a bit awkward for some reason. There we go, that's better. And again, just go down about 2/3 of the way. It will all become clear, I'm sure. So if I show you that, you can see that where I haven't put adhesion on that bit, I'm still going to have adhesion because it's overlapping, and the same occurs at the other end. So I know now that wherever that needs to come in contact with adhesion, it now does. But I haven't gone into this area here and ended up with stickiness that doesn't come into contact with the card. I hope that sort of makes some sense. Now, whilst we're on this closure, what I would say is we're fitting this to our box in situ. So it's very tempting to flatten out these folds, and I would say don't do that, because then it's not going to easily fit over your closure when you come to put it in place. So I'll just do another dry run, and you can see there that those ends are very much rounded, and they do need to stay that way. So I'll do this so you can see it. So I'm just going to remove the backing tape as usual from my double-sided tape. I have to take that off actually. And you can use glue for this as well. I do sometimes use glue, it just depends what I have to hand at the time, but too much PVA can make your card curl, especially if it's thin card, so just do be aware of that if you're using PVA. Oh, I'm making a bit of a ham-fisted job of this. It's not normally quite so awkward. So there we go. Just line those edges up. And there you have your band, which is specific to this particular box and therefore goes on and off with relative ease. So the next thing that we need to do there with that is just to apply this little ribbon embellishment. So that's what we'll sort out next. So I've decided to use some pink ribbon for this particular box. So I've already applied some double-sided tape to the back of that, and I use double-sided tape because of its dry nature. Really, it doesn't get absorbed into the fabric and cause it to go dark or hard. So I find that I like double-sided tape for this particular application. Now, oddly it may seem, I put the join for that ribbon at the front of the box because it's going to be covered by the bow, and I'd start slightly off center if I show you that. That will allow me a little bit of overlap, and the end should then be positioned centrally. So once that's in place, and I fit this in situ so that I'm not causing this closure to be any tighter by doing it when it's off the box. So I can just line that up so that it sticks across the back, move round to the front, and I used a length of ribbon that was about 5 inches long, because I knew that way I would have some excess. I could probably have got away looking at that with 4.5 inches, but it's just so that I can trim off any excess that I don't need. So I'll just do that. There we go. Oops, knocking over my glue. So all we need to do then is to place our bow in the center there. So I've already made up a little bow there which can go on, and that I'll be sticking on with some Yoo-hoo, because I find that that's quite a good glue for fabric. It goes off relatively quickly. So we'll just put a little bit of glue here. I'm always wary of squeezing these tubes, because once the glue gets going it doesn't seem to stop. No, it won't. Here we go, there we are. So, and you end up with glue oozing all over the place. It just gets wasted. So sorry if that's taken a bit more time than you might have expected. There we go, there's enough on there. Let's get rid of that stringy bit. Now I do tend to use a cocktail stick as well, just to move that glue around a bit onto these tails a little bit as well, just at the top, because if they have a tendency to splay out, I can correct them. So there we are. I'm just going to position that initially just so that I can see that it's got an even spacing at either end, and once I'm happy with that, I can hold that in place, move the tails to where I want them to be. And at this point it's worth removing that from the box so that you're not sticking any glue that might be on the edge of these tails onto the box itself. And just to give that chance to go down. Sometimes I use my bone folder as well, just to get those edges placed. And whilst we've got the lid off our box, we may as well put in our treats. And I'm going to be using these lovely Lindor eggs that come in these 3 colours, but I'm not using the red for this box, so I can eat that myself later. So I'm going to put in a combination of the gold and the blue ones, which are incidentally white and dark chocolate. Oops. Just pop plenty of those in there. Probably enough actually. A few left, that's always good. And then we can position our closure over the top and trim our ribbon back to where we want it. And I've now got a nice sharp pair of scissors for that task, because I noticed that the scissors that I'm using for card are gradually getting a bit more blunt. A bit more off there, I think. So there we are, that's our finished egg box. And it actually, as always, I do like to show you a few in different colorways because they can look a lot different. So you've already seen that green one, and I've also, that they've got gold eggs in, and this one's got blue eggs in, and that's a blue and yellow version. So those are our Easter treat boxes. Just as a reminder, this box is based on the standard A5 milk carton template. There is a specific tutorial for that which gives you a lot more information regarding this box, and there is a template that's available for free download from my website at GryphonArt.co.uk, and I will put a link to that in the description area for this video. Other than that, thank you very much for your time and have a happy Easter.